Every family thinks Alzheimer's is something that happens somewhere else. To someone older, to someone frailer, to someone already obviously unwell. Until one day a woman forgets a conversation she had yesterday. Then she gets lost in a parking lot she has used for years. Then she struggles to follow a recipe she has cooked from memory for decades. Then the people around her say the words that delay help more than almost anything else. She's just stressed. She's going through menopause. She's tired. She has a lot on her mind. It's just age. But what if those explanations are sometimes wrong? What if, in thousands of women, the brain begins changing long before anyone calls it cognitive decline? What if the earliest warning signs do not look dramatic, and that is exactly why they get missed? And what if the cost of dismissing them is not just delay, but lost time in the one phase where action may matter most? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Alzheimer's disease does not usually begin the day a doctor says the word Alzheimer's. It begins years earlier, quietly, biologically, invisibly. The proteins begin to accumulate. Inflammation begins to alter tissue. Blood vessels begin to carry less support to the cells that need it most. And all the while, daily life can still look almost normal from the outside. That is what makes this topic so important, especially for women. Women account for nearly 2/3 of Alzheimer's cases in the United States. For years, the easy explanation was that women simply live longer. And yes, longevity is part of the story, but that is not the whole story. Research increasingly suggests that the female brain may face a different risk landscape shaped by hormones, cardiovascular changes, immune responses, stress exposure, sleep disruption, and the ways symptoms are often socially interpreted when they first appear. Alzheimer's association. And that matters because when the early signs of dementia appear in women, they are often explained away with labels that sound harmless. Burnout, menopause, anxiety, depression, too much multitasking, too little sleep, normal aging. Sometimes those labels are accurate, but sometimes they become a trap. Because when the brain begins to struggle, it does not always announce itself with dramatic memory failure. Sometimes it whispers through language, sometimes through mood, sometimes through navigation, sometimes through a strange new difficulty handling tasks that once felt automatic. And if nobody knows that, nobody reacts in time. So in this video, we are going to correct that. Not with panic, not with sensationalism, and not with the empty reassurance that everything is probably fine. We are going to talk about the early warning signs of dementia in women in plain language, with the seriousness the topic deserves. And if you appreciate health topics explained clearly, without fear tactics and without sugarcoating, subscribe and tap like. This channel exists for people who want to understand what is actually happening inside the body before a problem becomes impossible to ignore. To understand why these early signs matter, you need to understand something about the brain itself. The brain is not a passive organ. It is not sitting quietly in the background while the rest of the body does the heavy lifting. It is metabolically expensive. Though it makes up only a small fraction of body weight, it consumes a disproportionate amount of the body's energy. It is active all day, active all night, and dependent on a constant supply of oxygen, glucose, blood flow, sleep quality, and finely tuned cellular communication. Even subtle breakdowns in that system can show up as changes in memory, attention, language, judgment, or mood. National Institute on Aging. And here is the part many people have never been told. The biological changes associated with Alzheimer's can begin a decade or more before symptoms become obvious. In that early stage, abnormal protein buildup, including amyloid plaques and tau tangles, begins affecting neurons. Damage often starts in memory-related regions, such as the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex. But early symptoms can also appear in non-memory areas, like language, spatial processing, and judgment. That means there is a window, a long one in some cases. And what happens inside that window matters. Because by the time symptoms become impossible to dismiss, the process has often been unfolding for years. Now let's talk about the warning signs. Not the stereotypes, not the movie version, the real signs that families miss. The first warning sign is a specific kind of memory problem, not ordinary forgetfulness, not walking into a room and forgetting why you went there, not blanking on a name and remembering it an hour later in the shower. That is human. What deserves attention is something more specific and more disruptive. Recent information does not just feel fuzzy, it disappears. A conversation from yesterday is completely gone. A plan made 2 days ago has left no trace. The same question gets asked again, not because the person is distracted, but because the original exchange never stayed encoded. Someone says, "We already talked about this," and the response is not embarrassment, it is genuine confusion. That matters because one of the earliest structures affected in Alzheimer's disease is the hippocampus, a region essential for forming new memories. When that system starts struggling, the issue is often not retrieving old information. It is laying down new information in the first place. National Institute on Aging, NIA. This is one reason families get fooled. A woman may still remember childhood details. She may still know birthdays. She may still tell old stories beautifully. So everyone assumes her memory is fine. But the real question is not whether old memories are preserved. The real question is whether new memories stick. And if recent conversations, recent plans, recent appointments, and recent instructions are consistently vanishing, that is not something to shrug off. The second warning sign is trouble with familiar tasks. This one is incredibly important because it does not always look like memory loss. It looks like friction. A woman who has managed the household calendar for years suddenly starts double booking things. A woman who handled online banking without effort begins making mistakes paying routine bills. A woman who could follow a recipe with no hesitation now loses track halfway through. A route she has driven 100 times suddenly feels mentally harder to organize. These are not just annoying moments. They can be signs that the brain is struggling with sequencing, planning, and multi-step execution. In medicine, this falls under executive function. That sounds technical, but the meaning is simple. The brain is having more difficulty organizing actions, holding steps in order, and carrying out tasks that should be deeply familiar. And because women are often highly practiced at compensating, this sign gets missed all the time. They slow down, they write more notes, they recheck everything, they hide mistakes, they push harder. From the outside, it can look like they are still coping. From the inside, the cognitive load has changed completely. What used to take almost no effort now requires concentration, workarounds, and strain. That is not nothing, that is data. The third warning sign is a change in language. And I want to be very clear here, because nearly everyone has had a word on the tip of their tongue. That alone means very little. What matters is when word-finding trouble becomes frequent enough to alter the way someone speaks. A common object cannot be named. A sentence begins and then stalls because the right word never comes. The person starts substituting vague phrases like "that thing" or "you know what I mean" again and again. Conversations become less precise, less fluid, less confident. This is not just social discomfort. It can reflect a genuine disruption in language retrieval networks. The National Institute on Aging notes that decline in non-memory aspects of cognition, including word-finding difficulty, may signal very early Alzheimer's disease. And in women, this can be misread in especially unfortunate ways. People may assume she is emotional, or anxious, or overwhelmed, or less socially engaged than before. But if language is becoming effortful, if common words are repeatedly inaccessible, if speech is becoming more hesitant in a way that feels new, that deserves attention. The fourth warning sign is a shift in mood or personality that seems to come out of nowhere. This is one of the most overlooked signs in women. Why? Because women's emotional changes are often explained culturally before they are examined medically. If a woman becomes more anxious, more irritable, less socially interested, more emotionally flat, or less motivated than she used to be, people quickly reach for familiar explanations. She's under stress. She's hormonal. She's depressed. She's overwhelmed. She's just in a different stage of life. And again, sometimes that is true. But early changes in the brain can affect mood regulation systems before memory loss becomes the most visible issue. A woman may lose interest in activities she once enjoyed. She may become unusually suspicious. She may withdraw from social situations that used to feel easy. She may seem more emotionally reactive, more uneasy, or simply less like herself. When that happens in isolation, many possibilities exist. But when it happens alongside changes in memory, language, organization, or spatial awareness, it should not be dismissed as just mood. Because sometimes mood is not the main problem. Sometimes mood is the clue. The fifth warning sign is difficulty with spatial orientation and visual processing. And this is where many early cases get missed for far too long. Because this does not look like the stereotype of dementia. It looks clumsy. It looks like a distraction. It looks like I need stronger glasses. It looks like getting turned around in a building. It looks like I misjudged distances. It looks like bumping into door frames. It looks like trouble following visual instructions, maps, layouts, or directions that used to feel simple. But changes in visual spatial processing are real and clinically important. The National Institute on Aging specifically notes that vision and spatial issues can be among the early non-memory signs of Alzheimer's disease. National Institute on Aging, NIA. This matters even more because a woman with visual spatial difficulty may still sound perfectly fine in conversation. She may remember family names. She may chat normally. She may seem engaged and socially intact, so no one suspects a cognitive issue. Meanwhile, she is getting more disoriented in grocery stores, less confident while driving, more uncomfortable navigating unfamiliar layouts, and more likely to blame herself for something she cannot explain. That delay in recognition can cost valuable time. Now, here is a sixth warning sign people rarely talk about, but clinicians and families often notice in retrospect. Compensation. Not the symptom itself, but the way a woman begins quietly covering for it. She writes more lists than ever before. She becomes unusually dependent on routines. She avoids new places. She stops volunteering to host. She leans harder on one family member to manage details. She begins withdrawing from situations that could expose what is becoming harder. This is where early decline can be especially deceptive, because the woman may look organized when in reality she is compensating. She may look private when in reality she is hiding confusion. She may look less interested when in reality she is avoiding embarrassment. Many women are exceptionally skilled at preserving appearances. They keep the conversation moving. They smile through uncertainty. They lean on habit. They use social intelligence to mask cognitive strain. And because they mask it well, the people around them often miss how much effort daily life has started to require. That is why relatives sometimes say, after a diagnosis, "We had no idea, she seemed fine." But she often did not seem fine to herself. She seemed different, more taxed, less certain, more dependent on systems she never used to need. And if a woman herself is saying, "Something feels off," that deserves respect. Now let's address one of the biggest myths in this entire conversation. If memory is mostly okay, there is nothing serious to worry about. That sounds logical. It is also incomplete. Yes, memory problems are one of the classic early signs of Alzheimer's, but they are not the only ones. Nye notes that early Alzheimer's can also appear through word-finding problems, impaired reasoning or judgment, and visual spatial difficulty. Think of the brain less like a single light bulb and more like a city grid. One system can begin failing while others still function well enough to hide it. Language may weaken while recall still looks acceptable. Spatial judgment may slip while personality stays mostly intact. Planning may become harder while short conversations still sound normal. So a normal brief screening or one decent doctor's visit where the person appears sharp does not always settle the question. It may simply mean the damage has not concentrated in the one domain that was casually observed. And this is where women are particularly vulnerable to being overlooked. Because women often present with symptoms that can be socially reinterpreted, because women often continue functioning while overcompensating, because women are often expected to absorb stress and carry cognitive load without complaint, and because when they finally do complain, they may be told they are tired, anxious, hormonal, or aging normally. But there is another layer here, and it is important. Why might women be more vulnerable in the first place? Science is still evolving, and honesty matters here. No one should claim the entire answer is settled. But major organizations and researchers no longer view longer lifespan as a sufficient explanation on its own. They are investigating the roles of biological and genetic differences, life experience, and changing hormonal environments. Alzheimer's Association. One reason menopause has drawn so much attention is that estrogen affects the brain in more ways than many people realize. It interacts with energy use, inflammation, synaptic function, and vascular health. When that hormonal environment shifts, the brain may become more vulnerable in some women, especially when other risk factors are already present. Then there is chronic stress, not one bad week, not a rough month, years of caregiving, years of hypervigilance, years of poor sleep, years of juggling family, work, emotional labor, medical appointments, financial concerns, and everyone else's needs before one's own. Stress is not just psychological, it becomes biological. It changes sleep, blood pressure, inflammation, blood sugar, and the nervous system itself. And brain health is inseparable from those systems. Then there is cardiovascular health. This is one of the most important points in the entire video. What harms the heart often harms the brain. High blood pressure, poor blood sugar control, physical inactivity, chronic poor sleep, vascular stiffness. These do not just threaten the body below the neck, they affect blood flow, tissue health, and long-term cognitive risk. And sleep deserves special attention, because deep sleep is not passive downtime, it is maintenance. It is during sleep that the brain appears to support the clearance of waste products, including proteins linked to Alzheimer's disease. Human research suggests sleep deprivation can increase beta amyloid burden, but this should be framed carefully. The evidence supports concern, not panic, and poor sleep is one risk factor among many, not a guaranteed cause of dementia. www.nih.gov. So if a woman has years of fragmented sleep, unmanaged blood pressure, chronic stress, and subtle cognitive changes, that is not a profile to brush off casually. That is a profile to take seriously. So what should someone do if any of these signs sound familiar? The answer is not panic, and the answer is definitely not waiting 6 more years to see if it gets worse. Start by documenting. Write down what is happening, not in vague terms, in specifics. What was forgotten? How often? What familiar task became harder? What words keep disappearing? What mood changes are new? When did navigation start feeling different? Has daily life become harder to manage? Patterns matter. Doctors need patterns. And memory is unreliable when memory itself may be part of the issue. So write it down. Then bring that information to a physician and ask directly for a cognitive evaluation. Not just a casual check-in. Not just, I've been a little forgetful lately. A real evaluation. Ask whether further testing is appropriate. A more comprehensive neuropsychological assessment can evaluate multiple cognitive domains rather than relying on a single quick screen. Imaging, such as MRI, may help identify structural changes or rule out other causes. In some settings, conversations about blood-based biomarkers are now possible as part of a broader clinical workup. What is appropriate depends on the person, the symptoms, and the physician's judgment. But asking specific questions is far more effective than accepting a vague reassurance. National Institute on Aging, NIA. And while you are doing that, do not ignore the prevention side of the equation. No one can promise total protection from dementia. Anyone who says that is overselling. But risk is not the same as destiny. Support blood pressure, support blood sugar, walk regularly, protect sleep, treat hearing loss, stay socially engaged, challenge the brain. Do not normalize chronic exhaustion. Do not treat constant overwhelm as the price of being a woman who handles everything. Because the brain does not exist outside your life, your daily physiology becomes your long-term risk environment. And that brings us to the deeper message of this entire video. Dementia is not always a lightning strike. Often, it is the late visible phase of a process that started quietly years earlier. That is why the earliest signs matter so much. The pattern of recent memory loss that is different from normal forgetfulness. The growing difficulty with tasks that used to be automatic. The language changes that go beyond an occasional lost word. The unexplained shift in mood or personality. The visual spatial confusion that does not fit the stereotype. The subtle compensation that hides struggle until the burden becomes too large to conceal. These are not things to obsess over, but they are things to know, and they are things to respect. Because women are too often praised for coping when what they actually need is evaluation. Too often reassured when what they need is clarity. Too often told they are fine when their own instincts are telling them something has changed. If this sounds familiar to you or to a woman you love, do not rely on memory alone. Write it down. Bring it in. Ask better questions. Push gently but clearly for a real assessment. Everything in this video is educational, not a diagnosis. But education changes what people notice, and noticing earlier can change what happens next. If this made a complicated topic easier to understand, subscribe and hit like. And if you know a woman who has been told her symptoms are just stress or just age, share this with her. Sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is not certainty. It is permission to take themselves seriously.